there's a move from, I guess, what's traditional reporting to what's termed analytics and dashboards. Okay, so reports, you may be served up bits of paper, two-dimensional, flat stuff that you just get. It tends to be information as opposed to analytics, so you can interact with and get sort of get more sort of probing of the underlying data. So there's a move more to an analytics approach in the general world. Things like security, scalability, and reuse of data is very important. So rather than creating a whole load of fragments of information, Excel spreadsheets, that sort of stuff, is to reuse the scalability whilst creating an organisational-wide solution and access to data. That's become more and more important. So that gives you a balance between, as an IT department, keeping control of what's going on, to starting to give the users more control of the data, use of the data, but also from a control perspective. Okay. And this whole thing around data discovery, so the ability to allow super users to access data, so not just go IT department or manage the reports, so allow them some degree of autonomy whilst under control, and to start to be able to interact with this information and data through search in more natural language as opposed to be a data expert. Okay, so there's a move towards those sorts of things. And then lots of guys, Sergeant Mark touched on earlier on, around things like Office 365 and Alan's mentioned this sort of Azure platform. So move to a slightly more subscription and cloud-based approach as the years move on. Okay, at the moment, relatively early days. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, Gartner sort of see this as moving towards 25–30%. It's going to be all around this sort of stuff. Okay, so it's as the platforms and technologies mature, this becomes more accessible. And certainly with things like Office 365 and the Power BI, this is where the sort of moves come into the sort of marketplace. So a little bit about just flick through. So traditionally, you have this kind of situation within a BI dashboarding environment. And apologies to you guys if you already know this. I'm just making sure we're all on the same page before we show you some real working stuff. So you've got information in different places. You probably use things like Tribal, capital solutions, all this sort of stuff. Bits of spreadsheets, God knows where it is, right? So you could have things all over the place, right? You may have line of business reporting, you could have all sorts of stuff happening here. So what people typically do is you have some sort of process to bring all this together. You've got a data cleansing transformation, so it's all nice and neat, so it all joins up. You put it in a central place, data warehouse, put it into a nice little format, maybe some data cubes, and then you do whatever you want here. Okay, so you make it sort of visual. So that's your typical, the next slide, that's your typical business intelligence platform. Information, different places, you need it in one place to make business decisions and then serve it out. So the traditional Microsoft approach to that is to use SQL, okay, this database, transform the information, put it in a nice format. You can then use various tools out of SQL, reporting services, some of you guys may use it, Excel, Office-based solution, to use Excel to actually get the views out, or the SharePoint platform, SharePoint Online, Office 365 is the platform to get that information out, plus some tools you can use within SharePoint, the visual end. So that's your typical, I guess what people call enterprise, but that's your typical business intelligence platform. So you may already achieve some of this, or you may not, but that tends to, I guess, produce information for questions that you typically know. Okay, so if you know what the questions are, you tend to sort of put a solution in place, and people get sort of KPIs and dashboards on a daily, weekly basis that refresh overnight. But it tends to be questions that you know, right? The next situation is maybe some questions that you don't know. Okay, so you may have this data, but there may be other data sources you want to introduce, and there may be some new questions you want to start asking. And that's why the data discovery side of things is sort of opened up a bit more now with the likes of Power BI. So you can start empowering the users to make more informed decisions and add new data sources in. So, kind of moving more now to a or personal BI, okay? Which would be typically the place where your super users or power users would sit. Okay, so they may have new data sources they want to introduce and discover. Okay, so data discovery tools. So there's a place for this and a place for the traditional BI. So they're starting to open this up. And this is where we're starting to use Excel-based technology and Office 365. Okay. And this has transformation tools in it. It has the visual side of it, so you can actually produce very, very powerful analytic reports, geospatial mapping, some modeling tools. That makes sense? Okay. So it's a little bit different to where things were traditionally, but this is starting to move out into the, let's empower the users to start to do a bit more with this data. Okay. So what you can start to introduce is information from, I think we touched on earlier on, around sort of social media places, how you interact with the students, maybe around open days, these sorts of things. So a lot of the interaction may come through Twitter and Facebook. They weren't traditional data sources, so you can start introducing this information into your traditional, tribal, these sorts of things. You can start to see what the general picture is. So you start to introduce other information that typically, where you wouldn't engage necessarily with students. The other thing to remember is mobile. So to be able to access this information through different devices. Okay, so your traditional desktop or laptop, that sort of thing. Well, now it's kind of your phones, your tablets, your services, that sort of thing. So it needs to be independent of device. Okay, so we're talking about browser-based solutions that can be, information can be available on demand to whatever device you want. Okay, so that's important as well. So, are there any questions at this point, or have I confused you all totally? So all we're saying is there is a place for traditional reporting, KPIs and this sort of stuff. There's also a place to get users slightly more empowered with different data sources. Okay. So we've got some examples around, Steve will dive into the demo. So we've got some examples around things like attendance, punctuality, observations, this sort of stuff. And you can chop the data up by sort of segments, courses, and that type of thing. So this is just examples of stuff that we've built. So I think with that, I'll let Steve dive in and just show you some of what can be done, some of the new world around Power BI, and how you can sort of get data and visualizations built up.
Okay. So firstly, apologies, I'm going to remain seated because I'm going to have to come around a little bit. But what I just wanted to sort of show in the history we've got really is that there are various tools to do various jobs within the stack. So you may be aware of some of them, you may not be aware of some of them. So I'm just going to go through some examples. I mean, Nigel's mentioned the platform underneath. So there is this element of we're going to drag data from disparate sources, somehow form that into a format that we want to then push out. And then the pushing out of that is the visualization front end. And you've got various options there. So once you've built your data warehouse and any analysis cubes that you may want to build, the next element is what you're going to use to push that out. How are you going to use the sort of tools that you've got in your stack to then push that data out. So I've got some really kind of sort of simple examples about that. So first of all, is everyone familiar with reporting services as a tool? Obviously reporting services is still there. Very good tool for producing structured reports, structured dashboards, pixel perfect stuff. But it is a development tool that you can use, but it will integrate with the SharePoint environment. So if people are using SharePoint and they want to use that as a tool to push stuff out, you can do that. So this is just a budget report wrapped into a SharePoint page as such. you know, it's fairly simple. We've got some KPIs on there. We can drill through. We can drill through to another level of report. I am technical. So, I mean, as I say, it's a fairly simple report. It's just bringing out some data, the ability to drill through on certain elements and get a little bit more information in a very structured way. So that is just a report. Sort of moving on from that, you'll probably be all aware of dashboard elements. Dashboarding, slightly different in my mind. I mean, reports are about putting out a report of information and lots of structured things. Dashboards tend to bring different elements together to give you a view of a business function, whatever it might be. But they, you know, for this example here, for instance, we've got finance data, we've got CRM data, we've got project performance data on these charts here, we've got support contract data here, also open support calls. So this is just a dashboard, a view of a business basically. So from the finance through to opportunities coming through and sales coming through, you know, project performance data on running projects and open support calls essentially. So that's all in one place. There's about 6 or 7 different systems that actually provide the data to that. And you can actually drill through these individually. Again, it's reporting services, and you can drill through each of these elements. To get more information about that. And as I say, it's reporting services, so it's kind of a predefined journey through that data. And that is, it's much more of that. I'm answering questions that we know we get asked. This stuff gets updated overnight, weekly, monthly, whatever that is, and people can come to it self-serve in a way that is, I need to see the information today, I want it up to date, I might need to get a little bit more information and drill on through. So I can drill through to the lowest level of wherever you collect that data or wherever you actually feel that you need to push that data out. So this is going down to the blocks of time that people have entered against a project. Moving on from that, the more interactive type of reports. So we've built one here just based around sort of progressions data, but this was based on a scenario where every sort of month someone was having to build a pack of reports and put them together. So the route to market was go and get the information from various different places, cut and paste it into Excel, produce the charts and the tables, cut and paste those into PowerPoint. So this is a report built in PowerView. Does anyone use PowerView? Okay, so yeah. PowerView is a little bit more interactive. It's a much more drag and drop environment for producing reports, but it's a little bit more interactive. It can be multi-page, so we've got a pack here that is about progressions, attendance, exclusions, and each element of this, so if I click on an element on the chart there, it'll filter the other elements of what I've just, my other tables within this. Give me some time to, but you can see that the sort of the interactive, each component part will interact with each other. We've got a multi-page report. We can apply filters on this, so I can actually go in and filter this report if I want to. But we've got multiple pages within this. So again, we've got a simple tabular report, but if I change my segment from 16 to 18 to adult, it'll actually apply that across each of the elements. And the actual environment to do this is a browser-based dev environment, so it's a drag and drop type element.
I mean, the relevance of some of these, as you guys know, is that, you know, things like everyone's focused on sort of revenue and retention of students and all this sort of stuff. So you need to make sure the student finishes the course, otherwise you don't get any full funding, etc., etc. So this sort of information, for example, punctuality and attendance, if it starts to move out of some sort of tolerance, you know, so punctuality is getting poor, that could relate to attendance getting poor, that could relate to, well, what's the problem? Is it a problem with a student, groups of students? Is it a problem with the course? So what you can do is look at this information before it becomes a problem. So rather than reports which are traditionally I've got at the end of the month or the end of the term or whatever, look back and think, well, that was going to be bad. This is learning to look forward. So typically you can focus on the exceptions and where the problems are and make decisions and actions in a proactive way as opposed to looking back and saying that was good or bad. So we can see the relevant business drivers around these, and how those align to what you're trying to achieve as an organisation in terms of attracting the right students, keeping the right students, and where they go to afterwards. So it's all kind of helping you make decisions in a very focused way.
Sorry, just flipping this into design view, because I just wanted to show you something around the interaction. I mean, this is the dev environment for doing these reports. I say it's a browser-based environment. We've hooked it onto an analysis model here. You can see what the information I can pull onto this report. But just on this, you can have charts where you actually drill through a hierarchy. So if I double-click, it'll filter the charts down appropriately. If I double-click through on performing arts, it'll drill through to the courses underneath. And to actually achieve that, if you look at the chart here, it's just literally I've dragged on a department name from my departments here, and then I've dragged on the course title. So it literally was so if you want to drill through to get more information in this environment, it's very quick to build. So I can stick the department name there, and then I stick course title underneath it. It's just telling the actual model that I'm going to drill through like that, and then I can double click on these things. So these environments are very quick to sort of build interactive sort of reporting in. It does require a SharePoint front end for distribution in respect to if you want to put it onto the web and make it available like that.
SharePoint 2013 only or 2010 as well?
2010 will support Power BI. 2013, if you've got Excel 2013, which I'll go on to in a sec, there are other options around Power BI because Power BI is built into 2013. So I'm just trying to show you some sort of simple techniques, and that is say how you then push these into SharePoint, how you surface them. That's kind of down to you really. I mean, SharePoint is a web application, so to wrap those component parts in an experience that might be more appropriate to your user is entirely up to you. So this is a very simple example of a SharePoint site. It's got some announcements. These are SharePoint elements. We've got some SharePoint pulling out a chart from an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. We've got a chart just embedded, so this is a little chart that is actually interactive as well. It's a performance point chart which comes down, but I can drill down if I want to, or I can change the measures I'm displaying there. So if I want to change that from sales value to something else when they load, I could actually just change what I'm viewing in that chart on the fly. Security-wise, if not only can you secure SharePoint as an experience, so if I log in as somebody else, I've logged into this chart here, you can see I've got a scorecard based on a hierarchy, and I can see everything. I can see across the whole of the actual brand. I can see Central England, East. But I've also logged in to this one as someone else. I mean, it's Birmingham area user here, just at the top. But as you can see, same report, same SharePoint site. There is a component missing here, so SharePoint security is stopping me getting into a certain SharePoint site. But also, we've secured the data, and that's within analysis services, and I can only see Birmingham and Solihull and the hierarchy underneath. But it's exactly the same report, so it's been used once, deployed many. So that sort of interaction, and because you're logging into SharePoint, the potential can pass through the stack. So that is more than yeah. So just their sort of structured reporting in a nutshell. So I don't know how long we've got. I'm trying to sort of get through it because there's quite a lot of the stack. But so that's really about sort of pre-build of reports, someone actually knowing the person at the other end is going to want, and you've got a process going on underneath that updates that data on a timely basis. So the next time they log in, they have an up-to-date version of what that data looks like. The other side to all of this is that sort of data discovery element. I need to go off and discover data, I need to do something with it, I need to analyse it, and actually I need to then share my findings. So in the last few years, that has kind of fallen into the Excel world. So I've got a very simple Excel spreadsheet here. We've got a pivot table across, so it's across that observations data we were just using in the last report. And the difference being it's been built in, so people, you'll hear Power BI get mentioned. Power BI is a kind of collection of numerous different tools that have come through, aimed at power users really. So you'll hear Power Pivot, you'll hear Power Query, Power Maps, and a Power BI sort of SharePoint element. So that's about the sort of distribution of this. But
so have you guys come across Power Pivot within your
do you want to use Power Pivot?
Again, a little bit.
To a certain extent? Okay.
So Power Pivot is an add-in to Excel in 2010. It's a free download. You can just download it from Microsoft, install it, and it becomes this little element here. And you've probably all, well, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but a lot of people tend to use Excel as something to do the analysis with. They'll get data from somewhere, they'll cut and paste it from a report, they'll cut and paste it from another Excel spreadsheet, they'll put it into worksheet, and they'll put a pivot table on top of it. And then from that they'll get a chart and they'll start to email that around people. So Power Pivot kind of lets you do that stuff in a much more structured way, but it also processes an awful lot of data. And it's essentially building an analysis cube underneath. So if I go into the Manage window here, what you'll see is I've got, and this is very, very simple. I've kept it simple because it sort of shows what you get out of just a table of data using it. But I've got options here to go and get external data. So in Power Pivot, I can actually attach to various different source systems and bring that data in. And if I want to, then I can then bring it in and relate it. So as you would in an Access database or a SQL Server database, I can actually define relationships between any tables that I might bring in here. And I've got all sorts of different sources I can go to. SQL Server, Azure, Access, all the usual culprits, Oracle, other reports, other Excel files, old data feeds, whatever it might be, I can hook into them. The difference with Power Pivot is once you've built that model, you can actually refresh it. You don't have to go in and hook into those systems manually anymore. It'll maintain the actual data connections, and you can actually do a refresh on the data, and it will actually go back and read each part of that data.
So just to add to what Steve's saying there, that data could typically be on premise. So it could be your line of business applications, or it could be the data sources. If this is going to be deployed on an Office 365 environment from a user perspective, you can hook that data, so the presentation later is in the cloud, you can hook that data into the on-premise databases. So you can start to get a mix. So this is the way you start to decide if the user experience is going to be through Office 365 or on-premise or a mixture of both. But the data can be typically on-premise. The user experience could be in the cloud on Office 365.
So I mean, within that model, you can do quite a lot of things. You can define KPIs, you can define your own calculations, you can derive new columns within the tables that you've brought in. So there's quite a big model you can spend. I could spend quite a lot of time going through it, but essentially all I've done is dragged in 8 tables worth of data from a SQL Server database. I've stuck a pivot table on it. You can see there, it's a pivot table with a drill down from department to course. But also within 2013, PowerView, so that PowerView thing that I was showing you earlier, is built in. So it's not built into the 2010 environment, but you do require SharePoint for the PowerView elements there. But again, it's just there, the drag and drop. Do exactly the same things. I've got my department, my course, I can drill on through. This is all happening locally on this laptop. So I pull all the data locally, I'm just working locally right now. It's all built in memory. And the whole idea around this is that you're hooking into source systems, disparate data, bringing it together and doing some analysis. And the idea then is, well, actually I need to share that. A lot of people tend to just email things around. A couple of problems there is that the person at the other end, if you email it, has to have the same version of Excel as you, especially if you're using PowerView, to interact with it, to open it up, to interact. So that's where kind of the SharePoint elements come in really. So I've taken that spreadsheet and I've just got a site here, 365 site with Power BI enabled. But just on its own, if I've got the spreadsheet there, so college observations, if I click on that, it will open in the browser. So that is that same spreadsheet using Office Web Apps in the browser. That's what you get with pre-roll, isn't it? And again, it's interactive. I can still utilise it. So it's taken that whole spreadsheet, put it up there. It's still running that model behind it, and I'm able to interact. So I can still go in here, and I can still drill on through. And look. So it's an interactive spreadsheet in a browser environment. Me there is the person at the other end. Doesn't have to have Excel installed on their machine to actually read this stuff. Taking that a bit further, so that is something you can achieve with 2010 SharePoint, 2013 SharePoint, but there is this Power BI slant to it, and if I just give it a couple of things, so you can see here there's a little button here, Power BI, so that tends to render, anything I've added in, it renders them like this. So they're a bit more user-friendly, they're a bit more interactive, you get a nicer tiled view of these things. But this is actually also backed up by an app. So I can actually access those spreadsheets that I've actually put up there via an app. So I've got a Power BI app here. So this is Microsoft, it's out there on the store. And I've hooked onto that. You can basically browse to your SharePoint sites, decide which ones you want. I've added some as favourites. But again, if I go into this, so you can remember this could be a tablet, it could be a laptop like this. It's just a Windows 8 app. And again, it comes up. Just give it time to give itself a little bit, but it's still interactive. That goes to the next page. So, not only have you can drill through. So that app is there, comes as part of that sort of suite to support this type of environment, or this sort of rendering of spreadsheets. One of the other things that once it's in this environment, you might have heard of the Q&A stuff. So what you've essentially got there is your ability to actually turn on Q&A against a spreadsheet. So on the menus here, I've got remove Q&A, but it's part Q&A, but it's got enable Q&A. What does that actually do? That allows you to then have an environment where you can go in and ask questions of that in more of a natural sort of search environment. So we've got some pre-canned ones here. So if I do show cancelled observations, pending observations department by the column, this interface goes off and basically searches across everything that you've enabled for Q&A. So any spreadsheet that's been enabled, and actually just, because it's indexed, it's trying to sort of work out the best route through that. So, I mean, that could be course, I could just write into course. And it will go off and try its best to come up with it does its best to try and render it in some sort of way. You can change it here. If we ask some other questions on it, I did some, if I do that, so just primary school enrolment and secondary school enrolment across the United Kingdom. It's gone off and it's reading, you know, a spreadsheet called World Bank Indicators. There's just data in there that tells us this stuff. Say, if we go into some of our other data, because of the keywords, you start to try and punt in there. See, there you go. So it tries to render it in an intuitive way based on what you've put in. So we've got geospatial kind of terms there in this way of state names. So it's trying to default back to a map view. So it's trying to just render that in a nice kind of way. But so this is a whole engine that Microsoft it's improving as we speak. I mean, you know, it's new to the actual stack, and this is just a way of interacting with that data. So this is more about people going in and asking questions of data. They don't really know where it's going to be. You know, you tend to produce a lot of different spreadsheets, a lot of different models. You can throw them all in there, and actually, if you spend a bit of time indexing them, put some synonyms by the you know, the words and the columns and things like that, people can actually go in and ask questions of that data without actually having to know where it's located. This is really about that interface for that sort of thing.
So this is where you have a number of key users or data specialists that are able to sort of build these reports and views, and then share them within teams, departments, or parts of the organisation that just want to consume them and use them in the easiest way possible. So it could be charts and that sort of stuff, or it could be geospatial information. We were with the university last week that use the sort of power map, or the mapping side of it, and they found spikes in recruitment of students in certain places they couldn't spot through other ways. So there are different ways of showing this information, but the general theme is there are key people who want to build this, and then you want to make it easy to be able to share it with the organisation. So the majority of people just want to consume it in a really simple way. Hence the interaction through more natural language as opposed to being data experts, but through one common platform, i.e. SharePoint Online, Office 365, depending on what your particular strategy is.
I think the key there is that because you've got access to Office 365, you'll have the latest versions of things like Excel. Just by default, they're there. So you can do a lot of this stuff. The Power BI element, I believe, is a cost. It's an add-in and a cost to what you've currently got. But it's there as a sort of market out to push anything else you might be doing from a analysis point of view, really. One of the other things I didn't mention was something called Power Query. So Power Query looks very similar to the Power Pivot window. I can go off and attach to all these different data sources. But what I also get an ability to do, so for this one here, I hooked into a web page, which is this web page here from HESA, and it's read out this table here. So it's gone through this web page, had a look at it. In fact, just to show what that does, I'll do from web. It goes off, it reads the page. And I can hook into, it's got all the same sort of things. I can go into a SQL database, Oracle databases, I can go into Facebook, you've got all sorts of safe, you know, Active Directory, I can hook into Exchange. So there's a lot there for interface-wise. So as I say, this has just read that page, and if I hover over it, it reads out the tables that it's found in that web page. So I don't know whether we've had people sort of they go to a service once a month to get some data from, for instance. They might go to a particular web page that has a particular table of data that gets updated on it, or it could be a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a web page. It could just be a URL to a spreadsheet that gets updated on it, whatever it is. But I can then take one of those, load it in, which I did do. Just go back. So if you can see on here, I get this little window to then say how am I going to shape that data. So that's how it looked when it came in. It's got some column. It's got some terrible column names. It's got some rows I don't want. So you can see down the right here, I've just applied some filtering, and as I sort of remove first rows. Now I've got these rows here, I'm going to use those as my headers. I'm going to get rid of the bottom 2 rows there. And this is all click and point and click stuff. So if I, for instance here, remove top rows, and it's just a click and point, and all you're essentially doing is doing a mini ETL. So you're bringing some data in, you're cleansing it. And every time you refresh this data, it will go off, look back into that web page, read the data, come back, and go through these applied steps here until you end up with the data you want. And then you can actually load that into your worksheet or into a data model. So the data model being the Power Pivot window. Yeah. So if you then load that, apply and close, you can, as you see, I've read a number of different tables out there, and then I've done one that actually aggregates all those four together through a merge. So it just merges, appends, sorry, it just appends all those tables together. And then that is a rerunnable query. The other thing with that is, if you've got the Power BI element in SharePoint, there is a share here, if I was logged in. But once you're logged in, you've got to log into Power BI, just into your SharePoint site, that is. But you get this share element. So once you've built a query, you can actually share it in SharePoint. And then if someone does an online search, so if I do an online search for data this is, if I do HESA, what you'll get is that'll go off, it's searched across things like Wikipedia. These are predefined by Microsoft, the Microsoft data catalog. So it's gone to Wikipedia to look for stuff, but it's also, if I do my organisation ones, it's all the ones that I actually have built myself and deployed. So you can actually build up your own data catalog essentially, and actually start to share that out. So when people are looking for, I don't know, how you define a student and a student number or an ID, then you give them one source so that everybody should get that same source then. So, you know, there's a lot of flexibility in that technology. And it's backed by a whole scripting language. You can do an awful lot with it, you know, not just point and click stuff. It's quite adaptable. So I thought it was a whistle-stop tour of kind of all the tools that are now starting to come through in that BI stack. We've got structured reporting, you've got SharePoint for collaboration and sort of using distribution of those reports if you want to. You've got Excel with an awful lot of tools for data discovery and visualization, and you've got SharePoint as a platform to sort of help you with all of it really.
So I mean, hands up, who has Excel used in the organisation for this sort of thing, or have you managed to get away from it? Is Excel used at all? Or? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Massively.
I guess the message here is, look, you probably can't get away from the use of Excel, but this is starting to use Excel in a more structured, organised way. So you keep some degree of control as an IT organisation. So there is that governance and strategy that you're building up. Plus recognising that there are people out there who really want to do this sort of stuff, and you don't want to be picking up the phone because you probably have the time, you might not have the capacity in your team, you may not have the allocation of the data. So there is that balance between that sort of structure and control and getting these guys, but it's all part of the platform Microsoft environment that you're already partly using,